when people now hear the word liberal, I think that's actually one of the most bastardized terms that's really sort of become so far removed from what it used to mean. But what did that mean when you were growing up there? How have you seen those definitions of liberal and conservative change over the decades?
Yeah, I think, well, as far as conservative, I guess the problem for conservatism, as far as back as I can remember, is a fundamental disagreement among conservatives about the classic question of what exactly you're trying to conserve. And so that's kind of always been the case. But for me, growing up in public school, it was I can remember a fair bit of left-wing indoctrination. I can remember, even history classes and how they were. Back then, nobody was using the term critical race theory. It existed, but the term hadn't made its way into public consciousness yet. So, but there was a lot of that kind of thing. I can remember even going back to elementary school, as they were de-emphasizing, the stories of heroism from American history and more, let's talk about all the sins and all the things that we should be sad about and feel regret for, even though we didn't do them.
Yeah.
So I can remember all that going back to when I was a kid. But even that it's just, as bad as that was, it's nothing compared to what kids are going through now.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to all the gender stuff. I mean, that didn't exist when I was in school at all. I mean, I think I was familiar with the term transgenderism. You heard the term, but nobody that I ever encountered when I was a kid identified that way.
I hadn't even heard that term until I want to say about 8 or 9 years ago. I remember people used to say transsexual.
True, yeah.
And transvestite. So a transvestite was someone who wanted to dress in opposite sex clothing. A transsexual was someone who'd actually done hormone therapy and had a sex change surgery. And now with this idea of transgenderism, it's just merely self-identification, and you can do that other stuff maybe if you want to. So that actually, I think in the past decade has really come to light. And then of course, terms like transphobia, which didn't exist and was not a word until very recently and seems to be the primary device and argument used for advocates. That seems to be the one thing they always just come back to. Anyone who asks a question, has any issue, any question, is just, you're transphobic, you're transphobic, you're transphobic. And unfortunately, that shuts down, I think, about 80, 90% of people because, I mean, as I mentioned earlier in this, I mean, it's now been over 3 years since I posted a flippant tweet on Twitter saying, hey, I identified as a woman, I just broke the British women's deadlift record. That was back in February 2019, when fewer people were actually talking about this. And that blew up and went crazy. And it just amazes me that more than 3 years later, this is still a debate. And it makes me wonder what's going on in Western society, and particularly, it seems, English-speaking countries, the Anglosphere, that is causing this psychosis, for lack of a better term. And I think it's combined with a pandemic of cowardice, honestly. And one thing I really like about what you do and respect is that you're courageous in your speech. You speak up, you say the things that other people are thinking, and you've got your principles and you stand by them whether people agree, disagree. You don't cower and apologize for absolutely everything. And that's rare. Is that something that's always been within you, or is that something that you've kind of learned and developed over time?
I think I've always had, I don't take a lot of credit for it because I'm also, I think I'm naturally antagonistic also and kind of a contrarian. So I have that, and so I call on some of that. I mean, there are many times in life when it doesn't really benefit you to be that way, but for me, that's kind of how I am. So it's not. That's why it's not. To be courageous is like you have to actually be. A courageous thing is when you do something and you're really afraid to do it, but you do it anyway. That's courage, right? But for me, with a lot of this stuff, I'm not afraid. So you don't have to call on courage. And when I say that, it sounds like self-congratulatory. I'm not afraid of anything. I don't mean it in that way. I just mean it doesn't occur to me to worry about it. It's like when a lot of people are very worried about being labeled, and they don't. You call someone racist, a homophobe, a transphobe. For a lot of people, that affects them deeply to be called that. They don't want to be perceived that way, and so you can manipulate them. And you're actually, it's quite sinister because you're taking advantage of what is in that person a positive quality where they don't want to be seen in a bad light, and they're just decent, normal people, and then that's how they end up getting manipulated. But for me, I just don't care at all the labels that you put on me. If you say to me, "Oh, I think you're racist," I don't care that you think that about me. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I know myself, I know what I am. It doesn't matter to me at all.
Yeah.
So there is, I think, almost to survive, and especially to do kind of what we do, and to be in the public eye, and to be engaging these issues all the time. There's almost this kind of like numbness you have to other people's opinions and feelings. And once again, that's something that in other spheres of life, I'm not sure that it's a positive thing all the time, but it does feel, it's almost a necessity these days because there's so much coming at you all the time. And you could have a million people coming after you, calling you all kinds of names. And it's almost a survival mechanism. You have to get to a point where it's just like, I don't care what any of you people think.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree exactly with what you said, because I get a lot of people who congratulate or thank me for my courage. And I have a similar response to you, which is that I think in one way it's a compliment. In another way, I feel sort of saddened that the bar for courage in society is so low that just saying what you believe to be true, or in some cases something that is objectively true, is now considered something that requires a unique and special amount of courage, when I think really it should be the default. So why do you think so few people have that level of courage? Because we're not talking about fighting in a war or running into a burning building and saving someone. We're talking about, okay, you might get called mean names, but you're not really putting yourself at some type of horrible physical risk. But it seems like now people's tolerance for risk, we saw this as well over the past 2.5 years.
Yeah.
The tolerance for risk is zero.
I think there's a lot that goes into it. Part of it is just living this comfortable Western life where you can go about most of your life and on a daily basis and not really experience very much suffering and pain. And you start to see that as the exception more than the rule with life. Whereas previous generations and even people now that live in other parts of the world, suffering, pain, deprivation, that's not an exception. That's just part of life. It's part of the deal. It's part of the bargain. We've been able to insulate ourselves from that. And so then it kind of makes you weak. And it also makes you feel like you're entitled to that kind of comfort all the time. And when anything comes along that threatens to take you out of that and make you a little bit uncomfortable, you recoil from it even more. And so I think that's part of it. People don't want, because we're so comfortable and weak, that even just disapproving comments, people posting frowny face emojis at you becomes, it's a real trial compared to what you experience on a daily basis. Then another part of it also is, I think it's also a matter of belief. And this really applies especially in the churches. So I get a question a lot about, with this film coming out, what is a woman? And one question I get a lot is, why aren't the churches talking about this more? Why are you out here doing this? Why aren't church leaders out addressing this issue of gender ideology and what it's doing to people? And which is a really good question, because they should be. I've been going to church every week for my whole life. I don't think I've ever heard this issue addressed from the pulpit in a really direct and substantial way. And maybe you can excuse that for like the first 20 years of my life, but the last 10 to 15, there's no excuse not to talk about it. They don't. Why is that? Well, there's the cowardice also, but then also I think it comes down to belief. I think a lot of the people that are leading these churches don't actually believe what we believe. They're pretending. They don't actually have this belief deep down within. And I think it goes beyond the church also. There are a lot of so-called conservative leaders who we look at them and say, why are they cowards? Why aren't they speaking out and defending our beliefs? Because they don't share the beliefs, actually. They don't, that's the dirty little secret. They don't actually believe a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
For me, I believe all the things that I'm saying. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. So everything springs kind of naturally from there. I mean, gender ideology, I say that it's a clear and present danger to civilization. We are destroying a generation of kids. You know, my whole spiel on this. I actually believe all that stuff. I really believe deep down that all that is true. And if you believe that something is that much of a danger to society and to your own kids, then what else are you going to do but speak up?